Now, the conference this weekend will bring together far-right figures from across Europe to try and rally the Vox Party's base ahead of European elections in June. And to talk more about it, we're joined by Aaron Winter, Senior Lecturer in Sociology at Lancaster University. Thanks for talking to France 24.
Thank you for having me.
So what's then the significance of this event, would you say, ahead of the European elections?
I think it's partly about boosting Vox, but also establishing a broader coalition of far-right parties that have already consolidated power in respective countries, but want to gain more within the European context and European elections. I think it's one in which we see right-wing parties more broadly forming coalitions and moving further to the right.
Yeah, so just to list a few of the expected participants: Marine Le Pen from France, Hungary's Viktor Orban, Italy's Giorgia Meloni. It's almost a kind of Eurosceptic prom, something like that, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I think, Meloni has said previously in the context of Vox's election defeat that the hour of the patriot has arrived. This seems a lot more than just mere Euroscepticism. This is a call, I think, for a far-right insurgency or takeover of mainstream politics, one in which the far right is increasingly mainstreamed and having a huge influence already on even mainstream conservative and centrist politics across Europe and in the UK.
How do you see these parties performing then in the upcoming elections, if you were to put a rough kind of idea of how they'll do?
My worry has been that they will gain more, but I think one of the problems we've had historically is the debates about whether their success, their actual electoral success, is the biggest threat. And I think we have this idea of how they will penetrate the mainstream. But it's really important to note over the past number of elections and I guess the past decade that the influence and success and impact of far-right parties is not just electoral success, whether in the EU elections or nationally, but the way in which they can set the agenda and the way in which the media can amplify not only their threat, but the way to mitigate that threat is to buy into or moderate and mainstream their ideas such that we have, even if they're not successful, even if individual parties are not successful or candidates, that the ideas, particularly anti-immigration ideas and sort of nationalist and even sort of like across Europe, civilizational politics, are themselves taken aboard by mainstream center parties and mainstream conservative parties in ways that seek to get their supporters and stop the I guess what is seen as a more severe impact of far-right extremism and racism, but nonetheless replicates their ideas and does great damage to the social fabric and to those on the sharpest end of those politics, largely Muslims and immigrants.
What about Javier Milei then? What is he trying to achieve with this visit, other than to sell his book and maybe tick off Pedro Sanchez?
Well, I think that is what selling the book is a good point. But I think what we've seen over the past decade and a bit is a wider, even though we talk about Euroscepticism, we're talking about a wider global bloc of reactionary right-wing far-right parties that want to consolidate power globally. And I think that is one in which is firmly established as a sort of political concern in the global north, but is wider. And I think that cheerleading across the world and making these links is not new for the extreme right or the far right, but is becoming increasingly dangerous as individuals and individual parties are elected globally in different countries and supporting each other in the wake of successes and bolstering in the context of losses.
Yeah, I think if you look at someone like Milei's libertarianism, he looks actually quite different a figure to some of these European ones. So what would you say is the common thread really binding these figures together?
I think it's a sort of a wider reactionary politics. It's an anti-leftism, um, and I think that's where obviously libertarianism also fits in. But I also think it's an idea of creating coalitions of shared interests and ideological overlap
Mm.
that can create a bloc and create new geopolitical formations.
All right, Aaron Winter, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for speaking to France 24.
Thank you very much.